Hey there guys, Micah Curtis here with another vlog style review, kind of in between the edited videos that are going on. And we got some really cool stuff coming. And of course, we're going to talk about Grindstone Art's comic book projects at the end, the things that are available for you. So stay tuned up until the end, if you would please. Plus, if you're enjoying the content that's being done on this channel, please do not forget to like and subscribe. We've actually got to a point where there's like 75% of people who are watching videos that come out aren't subscribed to the channel. So if you would do so, if you're not already a subscriber, please do. It helps us a lot when it comes to growing this channel. And the more we grow, the more we could do for you. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about Nefarious. So this is a commission review from Servant of God 777, who... he knows that I am a big fan of The Exorcist, and that obviously, I like writing fiction that has to do with the ethereal and things of that nature, so he wanted my input on this. Not to mention, on top of that, I also have a background in philosophy and theology, so that, this is right up my alley, to say the least. So, Nefarious is a story about a prisoner who is on death row that has to be examined to make sure that he is sane so that he can be executed. And the previous person who had been examining him had committed suicide. Now, the psychologist that goes in to make the evaluation, who in this particular film is played by Jordan Belfi, who some of you will probably remember from, I think it was Entourage. He goes in with, basically on a day's notice to go in and evaluate the criminal in question, who is played by Sean Patrick Flanery, who, for those who don't know, Sean Patrick Flanery was the other brother in, the Boondock Saints. So, here's the thing about this film. In watching it, the cinematography's pretty good. The acting is not bad either. But, oh lord, the script. The script has some problems. Okay, so this is actually going to be a spoiler-free review. I'm not going to go over any of the plot details unless it is relevant to one of my gripes. So this is what's called a conservative film. And some of you guys remember, and I mentioned this years ago, when we started seeing more people who are politically conservative start getting into the arts, is I worried that we were going to get to a point where we were going to have the right-wing America Chavez. Basically that, a comic book or a movie or something like that that is just as preachy as the left-wing stuff is, but from a right-wing perspective. And that was what I wanted to avoid, because that's not good art. It comes across as propaganda, and I do not want a sermon whenever I am watching a movie or something along those lines. And one thing you're going to have from me in this review is I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons to The Exorcist, and there's a reason for that. William Peter Blatty, God rest his soul, was a very religious man. He was a lifelong Catholic. He was very close to the church, and he was a fairly conservative guy in regards to his personal politics. But with that said, his stories were not preachy. They were very clever and very well thought out. The Exorcist obviously is an all-time classic story, an all-time classic film. Obviously he didn't direct it, but you get my meaning. And then, of course, The Exorcist 3, which William Peter Blatty, the guy who wrote it, also directed. He basically created a cult classic, which the third Exorcist film isn't really appreciated because of the timing it came out in, because the second Exorcist movie is so bad. And every Exorcist film, aside from 1 and 3, has been bad. Though the TV series isn't too bad, but that's a whole nother discussion. Point being is that I'm going to be making that comparison because a lot of the same elements that are in play when it comes to The Exorcist and being created by a religious man who wanted to portray religious people in a certain light. And then we have another film, in this case Nefarious, discussing spiritual elements. I can use The Exorcist basically as a point of where it went right and where it went wrong. So, Nefarious, it has a problem in it. And that is that it is preachy. And I mentioned that already, but I feel like it bears repeating, is that it is very, very preachy. So, the bulk of the movie is a conversation between the character of Edward Wayne Brady, or also known as Nefarious, that is the translated name of the demon, and then Dr. James Martin, the character played by Jordan Belfi. The conversation, and it has some interesting parts, and then it has its preachy moments. It's like these moments of, okay, this is really going into an interesting direction, and now I'm getting preached to by the writer. And that, to me, is very unfortunate, because I like the sort of artsy idea of a psychologist sitting down with a killer and trying to pull him apart. Like, what's some of the best scenes in The Silence of the Lambs and the film Red Dragon? It's the moments where either Clarice Starling or I forget the name of Edward Norton's character in Red Dragon, but when they're sitting and talking to Dr. Lecter, because you're getting the perspective of someone that just has something very wrong about them, but you can't really turn yourself away from them because the character and the brokenness of them, and I mean that in like the most despicable way, is very unique and almost kind of charming, in the sense that you want to learn more about it because it's not something that you're usually encountering in your daily life. So the concept of this film, I think, is really cool. And it, of course, with having the doctor that committed suicide, which is at the beginning of the film, that's not a spoiler. It's literally how the film opens. Like, the fact that the guy drove the dude to suicide just by talking to him, that creates intrigue right out of the gate, because you're dealing with somebody that is essentially such a good talker that he can just tell people to "and hero," and they do it. So, yeah, that's interesting. I dig that. Now, the problem that we have here is that we have a sequence of events where you're not really playing the gray areas of certain things that go on within the characters that are related to this. And that, to me, is really unfortunate. So let's talk about the things that get done right. One thing that I will say is that Jordan Belfi and Sean Patrick Flanery, they are doing everything they can with the material. They really are. And they're taking it seriously, and they're doing their job to the best of their ability. One thing, especially with Sean Patrick Flanery, that I will give him a ton of credit for in this, is that he does a fantastic job of making the demon, Nefarious, and Edward Wayne Brady seem like two completely different people that he can shift between rather easily. And that's something that I really appreciate about his performance. And then the other thing is that Jordan Belfi is really doing his best to portray a person who is a skeptic about everything that's going on, and yet is realizing that he's in the room with somebody who knows a little bit more than he really should about the situation. With that said, now we have to talk about what this film is doing wrong, and there's a lot when it comes to just the script. So before anybody chews me out for not liking this film, let me just, again, roll through the compliments again. Good cinematography. The actors are doing a good job with the material that they have. And especially the two lead characters are putting in a ton of effort with everything that they can do. It's got all of that, and again, I really like the concept. So all of those things, I've given you 5 compliments. Don't fucking start in on me about, Micah, you're supposed to like this culture war, blah 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 blah. No. I don't play those games anymore. I'm gonna, and let me make a quick note in regards to that, because I know that some people haven't really gotten the gist of the idea that I'm not doing the culture war thing anymore. There is 0 things wrong with being critical of a film that is on your political aisle, and here's why. If you want true expression to be out there, and you want it to be the best it can be so that there can be competition with mainstream Hollywood, you should demand better than what you're getting. You should always do that, because at the end of the day, having that competition is a good thing. The fact that they were able to do what they did with this film from what I understand, was a pretty limited budget. Like, that's awesome. There's definitely positives to take away from here. And I am taking those positives and I am very much expounding upon them. And I think that those things are good. And I think that independent filmmaking needs to be stronger. And the independent entertainment industry needs to be stronger than it is. I'm in that industry as a publisher, so I get it. But things need to be top tier. It needs to be the best that you can do with what you have, and that this film did not do it. And largely that is the fault of the screenwriter. So let's talk about that. The problem that this film has is the preachiness of it. So, again, I like the distinctiveness of having the character of Nefarious and then having the character of Edward Wayne Brady being so different. Edward Wayne Brady, he has a stammer when he speaks. He is very unsure of himself. Oftentimes, whenever he starts talking, you could tell he's on the verge of crying because he's essentially been beaten down so badly by this demon that he is possessed by, so on and so forth. The problem that I have is that the demon is out and out being a demon and not trying to be any way subtle about it or cast suspicion on itself. It's not really subtle. It's not really playing games or anything like that, or at least playing games in a way that would make me think that this character really is that good at manipulating people. It's very on the nose. So let's compare the character of Nefarious to the character of Pazuzu. Pazuzu being the character in The Exorcist. The character of Pazuzu is a little bit more subtle, is a little bit more tricksterish, likes to screw with your head and do things that make you doubt what is real and what is not real. It's very selective with how it does things and when it does things. Like, let's take the first Exorcist film, for example. And I know it's not fair to compare things to one of the greatest films ever. Get over it. You ought to study to learn what's better, who's better than you and why they are better. There's that one scene in The Exorcist where the demon the demon that's inside Reagan, turns her neck 180 degrees to look at her mother, and you hear the voice of the director, Burt Dennings, say, "Do you know what she did, your cunting daughter?" And that is there to confirm that, yes, this demon killed Burt Dennings when he was at Reagan's mother's house. Now, we don't know what Burt Dennings was doing in her bedroom. That's a little creepy. But regardless, you weren't supposed to like Burt Dennings anyway. When it comes right down to it, there's nothing like that here. There's no real mystery because the character flat out starts saying, you can't pronounce my real name, da-da-da-da-da. It's like, that doesn't really seem to me like how a demon would act. And then there's other parts where the demon starts talking about things that we as, those of us who are Christians, such as myself, would consider a sin. And there are issues that go on in the world that are really jacked up, that get completely ignored by people that consider themselves civilized. You know, things of that nature. Like, it goes into the whole thing about, and this is where the preachiness comes in. There's a scene where they're talking about how civilized the world is, and the Western world is. And, like, the demon brings up, you know, $30 million athletes that are talking about racism while they wear shoes made by slaves and things like that. I'm like, okay, so you've got the demon essentially quoting Ben Shapiro here. Do you kind of realize how, you know, if you're a conservative, how screwed up that sounds? Like, that's the problem. You have to understand, this is a major writing mistake when it comes to demons. You're writing a character that, by its very nature, is a unreliable source. So anything that it says needs to be taken into that context, and it's not by the writer, and that's why it comes across as preachy. I'm sorry if you hear some rustling in the background. I don't do a lot of the editing on these vlog-style reviews, and I was moving my blanket, because I just woke up at like 5 in the morning while I was watching this. So the frustrating thing is, it's like, you're not really turning the guy's thoughts on his head. You're not really doing anything like that. You're just talking at him. And that's not the way you should do it. And for those of you wondering, well, Micah, how would you do it as a writer? Okay, well, it's very simple. If I want to communicate to the world, to somebody, that the world is a lot more screwed up outside your front door, and you're not as perfect as you think you are, I wouldn't be so direct about it. I would be indirect. Like, there's this one thing where they talk about abortion, like the sacrificial areas of the pagan god Baal, where it's like a heated plate, and then the baby tries to get off the heated plate and rolls into a fire. And he goes into great detail about that, but the problem is it's so on the nose if you're comparing it to abortion. And there's like, you're just describing it, and it's supposed to be creepy and all this stuff. It's like, why are we doing it so on the nose here? Why don't we have the demon say something along the lines of, well, first off, like, how it knows about the doctor's girlfriend getting an abortion that same day. You know, he doesn't really go around that and do it in a way that is subtle. And I really feel like it should have been from the perspective of, well, you're really no different than I am. How can you call me insane if, you're just as guilty of killing as I am? The only difference is that society has determined that certain deaths are okay and others are not okay. And like you've told me, and this is me speaking as the character here, and like you've told me, you say that these things are deemed by society. Well, at one point, society thought it was okay to put babies on a giant burning plate so that they would roll into a fire and burn to death. Now we say that it's okay to just have them killed by a doctor. Death is death. You're still terminating a life, or the potential for life. At that point, what's the difference? Is there a difference? Is society so reliable? Does society screw things up? Society screwed a lot of things up over the last however many years. Think about it. Society thought Jim Crow was a good idea. Before that, there was a lot of society that thought slavery was a good idea. There's still parts of societies in different parts of the world that still think slavery is a good idea. I mean, have you ever looked into the statistics, doctor, about the sex slave industry, especially over in Eastern Europe? It is a deep rabbit hole. So, the question is, am I really that crazy when I'm not really doing a whole lot of things that are that different than what society's doing? Maybe I just killed people the wrong way. That's how I would do it. because you're presenting a worldview. You're presenting an idea of how this character thinks, and you also make them appealing to listen to. That was the other problem with the Demon of Nefarious, is he's just a douche. He's just a jerk. You know? And I understand, don't get me wrong, I hate evil. But Lucifer is not stupid. Lucifer is not just a douchebag. He's a douchebag, but he's a douchebag in a different way. In a lot of ways, Lucifer is a homicidal car salesman. You ever talk to a car salesman, to anybody who's out there? They are sweet talkers. I worked in sales myself. You know, I had to do some sweet talking back when I was younger. I get how it goes. And that is essentially what demons are. They are homicidal sweet talkers. They convince you into doing the worst things that you can do by making it sound ridiculously appealing. Even though it's against your best interests, even though it's a really bad idea in the long term, they convince you not to exist in the long term. They convince you not to exist with wisdom, things of that nature. And I really feel like there's too much emphasis on the idea of spiritual warfare and not enough emphasis on the idea of, I need to tell a good story with interesting characters that essentially has the idea of, you know, there are certain societal things that the devil loves that we don't take into account, but presented in a much more clever way. And that, I think, is the biggest problem that I have with this. And again, I put this onto the writers who wrote the screenplay, which is Chuck Konzelman and Carrie Solomon. You know, it's who also directed it. Like, you guys, no offense if they ever see this. I don't mean this to offend. I'm a critic. I'm not a douchebag. Subtlety constantly went out the window here, and because of that, the film suffers. And to be honest with you, if you had been much more subtle with it and had a demonic character that was a little bit more charming, a little bit more interesting to talk to, and things of that nature, that came across more like a master manipulator, like a Hannibal Lecter style character, as opposed to just douchebag murderer in a jail cell, then I really think that you could have actually had a film that could have become a cult classic, and they basically kneecapped themselves. So what I would recommend for anybody that ever wants to tell stories like this, study William Peter Blatty. Study The First Exorcist, study The Third Exorcist, read the books, you know, all of that. Because by taking a film like this and making it so preachy and so hard to watch because of the preachiness, all you're really left with is just being really, really sad at the fact that it's not everything that it could have been. So it's unfortunate. I can't recommend this film. I really wish I could. I still appreciate Servant for commissioning the review, and you know, it was at least, you know, I always at least get a kick out of doing these things for people, because if nothing else, if it's an entertaining review to listen to and it makes your day a little bit better, then we got something out of it, and that to me means everything. On that note, guys, I'm going to go ahead and take off. I appreciate you all listening to what I had to say here in regards to this particular story. Again, if you want to check it out, there are ways to do so online. I will leave you guys to your own devices on that. If you're looking for entertainment offerings from me specifically, of course, we have comic books in production at different levels here at Grindstone Arts. We have the book Human Shield, which is written by Michael Octavius. It's a continuation from the first Peregrine book about a superhero from Buenos Aires that is having to deal with a terrorist group that essentially one of their attacks ended up triggering his powers. It's a really cool looking book. The art really reminds me a lot of some of John Romita Jr.'s work, so definitely check that out. Another book, of course, that we have on the way, The Saint and Peregrine, the flagship characters for both the Reconstruction and Sleeveless universes, right there in a story where they're, oddly enough, they are fighting a demonic force in that. So if you dig stories about the ethereal, you're going to want to check that out. You're also going to want to check out books that we have available for pre-order, though they are delayed. until we sort out this PayPal issue. That means you've just got more time to pre-order it. So 3 Nights, 4 Days, story about 3 Crusaders coming back to find their village besieged by a satanic cult. And then, of course, American Monsters, the genesis of Project Lazarus, which is a Lovecraftian look at a scientific researcher who is having to develop a super soldier program for the government and all of the terrible things that they have to do to prepare for a war, an invasion from hell. So on that note, guys, again, if you enjoyed this, like, share, subscribe, check out the comic book and novel offerings from Grindstone Arts. I appreciate all of you for watching. My name is Micah Curtis, your favorite vanilla gorilla. Have yourself a great rest of your day.